So today we're going to discuss the Shower Posse. And I know that name doesn't strike fear into your hearts when you hear it. But let me give you a little bit of context, okay? Imagine hearing that name while you're taking a shower in prison. I'm just kidding. It has nothing to do with that, does not pertain to anything like that whatsoever, but just let me reassure you that it's not a crew that you want to mess with. But the origin of this gang is actually the story about a poor Jamaican boy who grew up well-mannered, considered an all-around great little human being, and smart as a whip. But that would all change one day when he was just walking down the block, minding his own business, and winds up shot 5 times and left for dead in the gutter. Now, if it wasn't for a good Samaritan, a kind soul, he wouldn't have survived that day. Now, weeks would go by as he recovered in the hospital. And then one day, that boy would reemerge onto the streets of his hometown, but he clearly was not the same sweet boy the people remembered. He had come back with a darkness in his heart, and for the next several decades, the Shower Posse would be the biggest, most problematic syndicate Jamaica had ever seen. So far-reaching that even the CIA took notice. Now, my name is Monks, and Tupac once rapped, "Thug ninjas on the rise, busters shot me 5 times, real ninjas don't die." I guess he was right. So let's all take a trip to Jamaica. A request from a subscriber named Justin Brown. What's going on, Justin? He figured that it would be interesting if he would hear a true crime from his own country, and I wholly agree. Now, fun fact, researching this case, I found that Jamaica was actually considered part of North America. But hey, you learn something new every day when you don't have much knowledge. But anyways, I also learned another fact, and it's not fun. It's more alarming than interesting, and that is Jamaica has some of the highest homicide rates in the entire planet. Now, for something like true crime, it wasn't hard to find, but it was extremely tricky gathering the information. But for you, Justin, I did my best, and I hope you enjoy this case. Now, as I stated earlier, Jamaica is one of the most violent countries in the world. They have over 50 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in this island nation. Now, you have to imagine yourself as a pathologist, a coroner. Now, you're doing your autopsies. Now, they would just continuously keep bringing in bodies around the clock. Now, as the bodies pile up, they're starting to decompose. You're having to deal with flies. Now, these are the conditions that one of the doctors has endured. And that doctor is named Prasad Catalia. And in a Guardian article, the doctor states, what can I say? The lack of resources is definitely a challenge. I have never seen such deplorable conditions and the lack of support from the government to resolve these issues. Now, this is in 2014 Jamaica, and at that time, they were only second in that unflattering category of most homicides per 100,000 people, just behind El Salvador. But by 2019, they scratched, clawed, and shot their way to be number 1. And by 2022, the murder rate had ballooned to 52.9 per. And in 2023, we don't even know the final count yet until the year is finally over. And what we can decipher from this graph is that year over year, Jamaica's population has been declining. And just last year, 2022, they saw their first negative population growth rate. Now, is there a correlation between the rising body counts and the falling growth rate? Sure, why not? But who do we blame for all this, right? We always have to have a scapegoat. Is it the do-little government? Is it the corrupt police force? Or is it the gangs that have pretty much overrun the streets at this point? Now, that's a hard question to answer, but there is one man that should definitely take at least some of the blame for it. And if you're guessing that it's that kid that got shot 5 times coming back with a dark heart, get yourself a cookie. That would be Lester Lloyd Coke. a most fitting name for a drug lord, you must agree. He moved copious amounts of cocaine and cannabis all across Jamaica, and being the ambitious entrepreneur that he was, he started moving bricks even outside of his hometown of Kingston, Jamaica. Now, Lester Lloyd Coke, also known by Jim Brown or Don Dada, but for the sake of simplicity, let's go ahead and just call him Lester. So let's go ahead and pick back up Lester's story the very day he got shot, and that would be in 1966. Now, little could be found about... Need water. So in a case like this, and like I told you before, finding information on these Jamaican true crimes is quite the task. So little can be found about why he was shot. Okay, so knowing that he wasn't affiliated with a gang at the time, and the neighborhood and the people knew him as a very good child, we could safely assume that he was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And after being shot 5 times and falling into the gutter, he would have surely died if this random stranger on a bicycle didn't risk his own life by picking up the boy and taking him to the hospital. Now, it was written in several articles that there were tons of witnesses to this shooting, but everybody was just too scared to interfere with these local gangs. They would have been the target if they were to lift a finger. So this man truly was a hero. He literally saved a boy's life, even though, you know, there was no way to know what this boy would become and the damage that he would pretty much reap. And like I said before, when Lester Lloyd Coke got out of that hospital and set foot back into his neighborhood, it was game on. He was playing the same game, but he was better at it. He was smarter at it. And he had a giant chip on his shoulder that made him even more ruthless than they were. He became the type of person that could walk into his opposition's house and murder 5 people in cold blood. And this is a true example. He walked into a house with a .45. Headshot everybody in that house, obliterated all living ops, and simply walked out just to let, you know, other gang members and rivals know that he was not fucking around. He was now cold, calculated, and ready to run these streets. So by the 1970s, is it any surprise that he pretty much had the game on lock in Kingston, Jamaica? He started running with a crew called the Phoenix Gang. Now, Lester rose in the ranks because of the way he was, his wit, over time, and he was only second in command to a man named Claudius. And when that happened, eventually Claudius would be murdered, leaving Lester solely in charge. His first line of action: scrap this silly name called Phoenix, and he rebranded the gang as the Shower Posse. And the origins of this name is debatable, but the one thing that I read that I thought that was kind of cool was that the Shower Posse just meant that they would shower people with bullets. Aren't you glad I added with bullets? Now, being the industrious gang boss that he was, Coke got himself into the arms trade. He was now running guns along with his drugs. His money started to pile up taller than he was, and boy, did his reach start to grow along with his power. Now, with the help of a partner named Vivian Blake, now they branched out all the way to Ontario, Canada, and eventually it would bleed into America, the United States. They would go to cities like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, and by the 1980s, the Shower Posse was embroiled in numerous gang battles because the local gangsters, they needed to eat too. So by the 80s, they were in an all-out drug war, and the streets were fucking hot. And the biggest beef they had was with a gang named Black Junior Mafia out of Philadelphia. On August 4th of 1985, an all-out gun battle erupted at a Jamaican event attended by 2,000 people in Oakland, New Jersey. 3 people were killed, 9 wounded, and the police wound up confiscating a whopping 33 guns. Now, although as the war raged on the streets of the United States, Canada, the man behind it all was living comfortably in Jamaica, raising and growing a family of his own, giving his wife a fine lifestyle, sending all 4 of his children to safe, prominent private schools, giving them the luxuries that he never had. But sometimes life opens up a running tab, like in a bar, and keeps track of all the dirt you did. And it was unfortunate that his kids would eventually suffer the consequences of their father's actions. But before we get to that, the father himself, Lester Lloyd Coke, would run into his first mishap. Because in 1989, one of his henchmen, some dude named Charles, street name Little Nut Miller, was picked up for drug trafficking. Now, Little Nut really showed why his nickname was why it was, because he started singing like a bird. He started snitching on everybody. And Lester Lloyd Coke and 9 others would find themselves in prison the following year because of it. Now, Lester still ran his gang from within prison, as they usually do, but because he wasn't physically there for his family, there are certain things that he wasn't able to do, like protect them 100% of the time. So after 2 years behind bars, heartbreaking news would find its way to Lester. His eldest son, a kid named Mark Anthony Coke, simply known as Jackie. He was riding his motorcycle when a rival gang noticed him and shot him dead in the streets. Needless to say, this sent Lester into a rage, and for the next 2 weeks he would send out his orders, and the streets of Kingston was literally a war zone. 12 people by the end of it would be killed in that bloody February. And then the ringleader himself, Lester Lloyd Coke, while sleeping in his cell, caught on fire and burned alive. It was ruled an accident. And unfortunately, the father's misdeeds would still punish his own children, even from the grave. His daughter, known as Mumpy, and her husband were out one night when they both found themselves in a hail of bullets. Both would be hit numerous times, and they would die. This would leave only 2 Coke sons left, one named Layton, street name Livity, and another boy named Christopher, street name Dudas. Now, Livity wanted to take over his father's gang, and being that he was the eldest son, he expected to get the position. But Dudas, who actually wasn't even Lester's biological son, adopted as a matter of fact, everybody knew him as almost a student of the game, an avid learner, soaking in all Lester's teachings, including his ruthlessness. The higher-ups in the gang, they noticed. They saw the qualities of Lester in Dudas, and in true gangster democratic fashion, they instead voted Dudas to be their leader, leaving Livity as probably the most disgruntled member of them all. In short, Christopher Dudas Coke put on his old man's J's and filled them out perfectly. The gang continued to prosper under him for the next decade. Dudas was actually somewhat of a beloved figure even in his community that he was peddling drugs to, because at the same time he was spending that same ill-gotten gold from the Americas, from Canada, from his own streets, and putting it back into improving the slums of his hometown, which, I must say, should sound like the dream for a drug lord. Am I right? Revered in your own town, rich beyond measure, the money keeps stacking, the power keeps stacking. But, of course, when you do your job so well in this line of business, you tend to catch some unwanted attention, because don't forget that this criminal organization running out of Little Kingston, Jamaica, had its hand in the honeypots of North America also, and it was only a matter of time before the U.S. government, they started following this drug-laden breadcrumb all the way to Liberty Gardens. The Americans sent an extradition notice to the Prime Minister of Jamaica for one Christopher Dudas coke. They wanted him brought back to America to stand trial for drug and gun trafficking. But when the Jamaican authorities tried to apprehend this somewhat beloved figure, let's just say that any mayhem that I might have told you about thus far would pale in comparison to the massacre that would ensue. When the dust settled, so to speak, 70 people had been killed. Can you fathom the magnitude of 70 people practically murdered in order to get one man? It's mind-boggling if you think it is a massacre by every sense of the word. But they would capture Christopher Dudas Coke. He was extradited to the United States in 2010. He pled guilty in 2011 to federal racketeering charges and some type of assault. I forgot to look up what assault that would be, or it was actually attempted assault. This would actually turn out to be a rather simple trial because Dudas didn't argue any of the charges. He simply stated, "I'm pleading guilty because I am." He was sentenced in New York City to 23 years in prison. Well, do you guys remember Livity? Back home, he always wanted to run his dad's business. Now he gets the opportunity. But no offense to Livity, but without a man like Lester Lloyd Coke, without Dudas, there just wasn't a strong leader in the gang, which created inner turmoil in the gang. And of course, the built-in power struggles with other rival gangs. The posse started to crumble, and soon they would be no more. My name is Monks. If you guys enjoyed this story, this little known story out of Jamaica just for Justin Brown, please give this video a thumbs up, the least you can do, or hey, bless me with a subscription, and I'll work hard to bring you more stories like this one. But for now, go protect the ones you love, and love the ones that protect you.